Welcome, everybody. This is the 10th episode of the Don't Sing podcast. Today I have Jill Sitnick. She is a multitude of things. I would describe her as a PTSD survivor and also a MDMA assisted therapy advocate. And she has a wealth of knowledge to give and a great story to tell. So I'm going to give her the floor and allow her to first talk about where she grew up.
I know it. So thank you so much for letting me be here, and it's a pleasure. And the
Always.
question was, what was the question? Where am I?
Where'd you grow up?
Oh, where'd I grow up? Oh
Hmm.
my gosh. So I'm on the eastern side of the U.S., Philadelphia and New Jersey. I kind of
Nice.
moved around. I went to about 13 schools before I graduated, so it was
Wow.
a mix between Philadelphia and New Jersey area. And I'm in Westchester. I'm about an
Yeah.
hour south of Philly.
Nice, nice. I love Philly. It's a great city. Such a great city.
Fun, fun.
Um, so I kind of wanted to dive into your upbringing and what are some things that you noticed in your upbringing that were not only troubling but um influenced the way you are today.
Oh my gosh. Do you have like 5 hours?
I have all the time in the world. Yeah. I know it's a
Yeah.
lot to unpack.
So here's the thing. I'm Generation X. I had no understanding of what trauma is. I
Hmm.
just always knew I had a bad childhood.
Yeah.
My father was verbally abusive, mentally abusive, physically abusive. My mother was clinically depressed the majority of her life, attempted suicide multiple times. They divorced when I was about 5 years old after my mother had attempted to kill herself via shotgun and did not succeed.
Wow.
And so I wound up, my childhood was 1 through 5 was kind of being marinated in this abuse and neglectful environment with two people who came into a relationship with a lot of trauma of their own who really could
Right.
not parent. And then I was moved around a whole lot. And then later on, my father threw me out of his house. My mother threw me out of her house. Basically, by the time I was 19, like a month after my 18th birthday, I was on my own, and I pretty much said, I'm not going to live my life in any way, shape, or form the way that my parents did.
Right.
Fast forward through a lovely long-term relationship that kind of grounded my nervous system, and my anxiety and stuff that I now know is trauma
Hmm.
just kind of chalked up to being like super type A and wanting to get things done, like a really, really strong work ethic.
Yeah.
No, it was trauma and anxiety. Hindsight's
Yeah.
2020. My partner of over 20 years passed away. 18
Sorry.
months after his Thank you. 18 months after his passing, I had a panic attack over something that was like this important. And
Hmm.
that's what ultimately led to a PTSD diagnosis from childhood stuff. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I had no
Yeah.
idea. So that's a whole bunch of big stuff
Yeah.
condensed. So I'm sure I created questions.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to dive into the relationship because that's actually a beautiful thing that it grounded you
Yeah.
because a lot of people have an alternate story to where they go through a lifetime of trauma and anxiety and then they enter relationships that kind of even amplify that and create more of that feeling.
Yeah.
And it's kind of beautiful to see that you had a relationship that actually counteracted that and grounded you. Can you speak on like what kind of things in the relationship made you realize like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to be loved and treated?
Oh. I wish I could almost say it back to you. This is how I deserve to be loved and treated. There was a ultimate kindness.
Mhm.
There was an agreement between the two of us that words matter, and we were always going. We very rarely argued, and we were also very careful with our words. Um,
Mhm.
there was this understanding of we're in it together. Um, and we were similar in a lot of ways. I, of course, went ahead and healed a lot of trauma. I think he had some trauma too. And it just resulted in two people who wanted to be the support for each other. kindness is an underrated word. When you are
Yeah.
used to people being unkind, gravitating to kindness. And don't get me wrong, I'm fully aware that with my background, the universe stepped in. I got super lucky because you're right. We very often kind of partner with what our parents were in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And I was very lucky I didn't. So,
Hmm.
yeah, if you had said to me trauma, especially
Yeah.
while he was still alive, I've been like, what? No, just kind of like super anxious and super go get him and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, got very lucky.
You being a part of Generation X, growing up, um, I'm I'm like on the verge of being a millennial and Gen
Okay.
Z, kind of on
Okay.
the border. I was born in 1999.
Oh.
Um, yeah, right, right.
Oh.
So, growing up, like, how was mental health perceived in the public? Like, was it something people talked about, or was it just like taboo?
Oh my gosh, phenomenal. It's so different now. Yeah, it was there was not really any sort of understanding that was ever brought into my world. So
Right.
I'm not saying it didn't exist everywhere. In
Hmm.
my world, there was a little bit of therapy to deal with my mother's suicides. Like I was very, very clear my mother's attempt at suicides didn't have anything to do with me. Didn't really deal with the abandonment, like why would my mommy leave me, that kind of stuff. But I knew it wasn't my fault. But then moving forward, my mother was clinically depressed her entire life. She even tried to commit suicide like 3 years before she died at like
Wow.
64. So I didn't have a whole lot of faith in therapists or the medical treatments available, the drugs that were available, because I just looked at my mom and I was like, the whole system failed her in some way, shape,
Hmm.
or form. I know that I grew up one of the hints, I learned this at a conference, one of the hints that you might have a PTSD reaction to your childhood is if you never talk about your childhood.
Yeah.
And I never talked about my childhood. I was 1,000% sure people would see me as damaged. I was damaged goods. Um, and so I held that internal feeling, and I just thought that was normal.
Right.
I just thought that was normal. So very, very different from what I see on, I'll show my age on the TikTok.
Uh-huh.
I like calling
Yeah.
it TikTok. I think folks your age have a much more openness towards the idea that exists in any way, shape, or form. Nobody's story is more traumatic than anybody else's.
Yeah.
And that was not how I grew up.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of a quote that I think about a lot. It's anybody's worst moment in their life is the worst moment in their life. And it doesn't matter what it is, how big or small. Um,
Right.
and that's kind of like a point of emphasis I want to touch on because a lot of people um, get their mental health kind of like minimized and just
Mm,
brought down to a level where they think, oh, well, I'm, this is something I need to get over or something that's not that deep,
yeah.
but it's on a case by case basis. No one's trauma is any more traumatic than anyone else's. It's all relative and it's all based on your experience growing up. If you grew up with a mom and a dad and you had a relatively good upbringing, but then you enter your adult life and face challenges and different feats that you have to overcome, it could be just as traumatic as somebody who grew up without any parents.
Oh,
And I think
yeah.
that's important for people to understand. Um, so when you were growing up and you were going through all this, were you self-aware at the time that you were growing up different than anybody else, or were you kind of like this is how everybody's growing up?
No, I was extremely aware. I had two guidance counselors like start crying when they heard my story because I had to move
Mhm.
schools a lot. And
Right.
I remember thinking, you're not the one going through it. Like
Mhm.
I had kind of become a little bit numb. I will say, I don't think I understood the extent of the weirdness.
Mhm. Yeah. Right.
Like there's a couple of stories about my father. that when I started to kind of open up to my therapist, and like her eyebrows would go to like the top of her head, she would like,
Hmm.
what?
Yeah.
And so I knew my story was different. I didn't know the degree, and it wasn't until the healing and really talking about it. And people were reading my book and they're like, Jill, was your dad like a psychopath? I'm like, I don't know. He
Mm,
was never diagnosed.
right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know how people can tell? So, a little hint to your listeners that I had to learn is that it doesn't really matter what you think in
Hmm.
terms of how weird your background, or you had a traumatic thing, and because that's what happens. That's how our bodies respond to stress. It's a natural way that our bodies respond.
Hmm.
If you can feel it in your body, and I always do this because I think like my entire life, my shoulders were like up to my ears.
Yeah.
But if you can think about a childhood thing that you're like, that wasn't great, and you feel it in your body, more often than not, that's a sign that there was some trauma that, and now your body is kind of saying, hey, I'm still reliving that. Can we heal that a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to think of the body as like a living journal. It's like, you time never stops for us, but your body keeps track of everything, whether you're aware of it or not.
That's
And
good quotes.
yeah, it's fascinating just how much our body remembers, because we as people don't remember much, and a lot of times we shoot memories back to the back of our brain, and we just kind of forget about them, but our
Yeah.
body never forgets. And it's fascinating, just the recollection, like in the first 5 years of your life, so much of those experiences stay with you for the rest of your life. And
Yes.
most people can't remember their first five birthdays. So it's amazing how our body just recollects all these things. And not only does our body remember it, it doesn't, it stores it in different places. It doesn't just, like you were
Yes.
alluding to before, the shoulder going up, like our body has physical responses to these traumas, and they can be stored in our physical actual body. And it's fascinating how we are kind of unaware of these things. And the more research is being done about trauma and therapy, the more we can dive into our own psyches and bodies and try to unravel these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how did you
Your audience,
first? Oh, go
your
ahead.
audience, your audience might like The Body Keeps the Score,
Hmm.
and any
Great
book
book.
that kind of shows up along that line. That's the book that I didn't believe my therapist when she said I had PTSD. I was like, have you
Hmm.
met me? Corporate girl
Right.
lady, come on. That's the book that made me understand trauma in the body. So I think that aligns really well with everything you just said. So I just want to throw that resource out for folks.
Yeah, great book. I was actually pointed to that book on another podcast I did.
Yeah.
I gave it a read. It's a great book. Another great book about trauma is called Trauma by Paul Conti. And that book kind of opened my eyes to not only the physical, visceral reactions we have to the trauma stored in our body, but different ways we can go about treating it, and different ways you can go about not only understanding it, but having that awareness, because that awareness is so important. Because if you are unaware that you have trauma, there's no way about going about fixing it. It's like an addiction. Like if you can't fix it unless you acknowledge it's there.
1,000%. Yep.
And um, how did you first come across um, MDMA assisted therapy? Like, what was your first introduction to that?
Yeah, so I got very, very lucky, which is one of the reasons I take the opportunity to talk about it, because I really was extremely privileged in the way that things happened for me. So, the therapist that I went to after my partner passed, she had helped me with the grief work, and we kind
Mhm,
of ebbed and flowed. And this panic attack over a work email of all things
mhm.
was 18 months after my partner had passed. And like, if you had looked at the surface of my life, everything was fine.
Right.
when I went to her and I started describing what was going on, I had this overwhelming fear, lack of control. Universe was out to get me. All of my safety nets were going to be destroyed. I was going to be living in poverty the same way that I was when I was a child. It was so clearly that toddler saying, life is falling apart.
Mhm.
And after a few months of talk therapy that did not ease the symptoms. Even after I understood what the diagnosis was, we continued to have talk therapy. And ultimately, I wasn't making progress. I was becoming increasingly more suicidal. I wasn't seeing a point. If everything I had done in life was not worth it and I was just going to be poor again, like I
Yeah.
totally 5% of my 5% was like, look, this can't happen. And 95% my body was like, we need to get out of here. We're in danger.
Mhm.
And one day, one of our sessions, she said, look, I'm training to be a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. Go take a look at maps.org, MAPS.org. This is a mouthful. The Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Mhm.
They're running the clinical trials. Go take a look at the research because you're not making any real progress with the talking.
Yeah.
So if this is a healing modality that you want to try, and so that's what happened. She pointed me to maps. I looked at the research. I saw something that said close to 3/4 of the people in the randomized trials actually didn't qualify for PTSD symptoms. Remember, I had very little faith in therapy and drugs from my mother, from the experience with my
Mhm.
mother. And I was not only going to be working with my doctor that I had now known for a couple of years, but I was also going to be working with a medical doctor, so a guide and my therapist. And I didn't see any other way.
Yeah.
So I agreed to it. And I had all the stereotypes: Generation X, eggs in the frying pan. I had tried ecstasy once in my life. I had tried pot once in my life, like totally not like I'm concerned about how much Benadryl I took, that
Yeah.
kind of person.
Yeah.
So for me to do this, I really took a bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah. That's the thing about the MDMA assisted therapy that a lot of people are kind of hesitant to, because I know a lot of people are like really, really, on the fence about substance use. And um, to people that are a little bit more, reserved and conserved about what they put in their body, it could be
Mhm.
kind of like a big question mark, like why would I do this? Or they'll try to put themselves on a pedestal like, oh, I'm better than that. I don't need to do that. I can just deal with it myself.
It's a drug.
Um, yeah, it's a quote unquote drug, so they don't want to, you know, go to some outside source that they don't know too much about.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to give people a background on MDMA and
Yep.
its origins. I know that it was synthesized in 1912
Yep.
by
Early
Merck,
1900s. Yep.
which is a pharmaceutical company,
Mhm.
which is kind of like ironic that now we're trying to like fight to get it used in pharmaceutical uh context, because the pharmaceutical company is the one that made the drug in the first place.
The irony.
Yeah. So it's like, it's funny how over time things get kind of, seen as taboo, or things get, criminalized. And
Yeah.
um that's a big kind of reason I started this podcast, was to enlighten people on the importance of education and research.
Yep.
Because through legalization, a lot of people, when they hear about drug legalization, they hear, oh, well, people just want to do more drugs. Of course, you want to get it legalized. Like, you just want the access to do more drugs. But in the grand scheme of things, drug legalization leads to research and the ability for scientists and academics to further study these compounds. And one example of that is marijuana being
Mhm.
decriminalized. It was used by millions of people for decades and decades and decades, even through the criminalization of it.
Right.
But um, the thing about it was, even though we have a plethora of great reviews, um, there's not too much. scientific research backing it and its positive effects and
Yes.
even the negative effects. And um, recently, there was a lady who had a psychotic break from using marijuana, and
Mhm.
she stabbed her boyfriend. I think it was like 108 times,
Mm.
and she actually wasn't um, given any prison time, and she was given like a program to get into, and she um, had to do community service. And a lot of people look at that like, well, when I smoke weed, I don't want to stab people, but it's far more nuanced than that.
It is. We can talk about set and setting if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, People should understand that there are positive and negatives to every substance that you use.
Yes.
And now that there's more research and through the legalization and decriminalization of weed, um, scientists have actually come to recently find out that it can induce psychosis. And not only can it induce psychosis in high concentrates, it also um, decreases testosterone when you
Hmm.
smoke it. And this may be like not a barrier to entry to anybody, but just knowing that and that research that we found in just the last 12 months has been from the decriminalization and legalization of it. We would not have access to those facts
Research.
in that research if it was not legalized, because scientists, when something is criminalized, scientists are not allowed to research it. They cannot test it.
Yes.
They cannot put it under a microscope. So I think it's so important for people to understand that deeper research is important and legalization is important for that aspect.
Yeah.
So going off of that, um, can you name some of the positive and negative benefits of MDMA and MDMA assisted therapy?
Yeah. So a couple of things from the comparison with marijuana to MDMA. The very first thing, because not only, that story of stabbing someone 118 times, or you go on Reddit and you hear these stories of people doing crazy stuff,
Hmm.
you should always ask the question of what was the mental state of someone going in? What was the dosage? Where were they?
Yeah.
Whenever we hear a crazy story that somebody was drinking and they did XYZ, what's the first thing you ask? Well, how much did they drink? What's the
Right.
second thing you ask? Well, was there a problem with their significant other, or like what was going on in their life?
Hmm.
That's the same line of questioning that should be asked when you hear stories about any sort of substance that's going into somebody's system. I just happen to use the example of alcohol.
Hmm.
So set and setting are super, super important. Whenever you're talking about psychedelics, the mindset, how much you've prepared, or are you scared, or do you have schizophrenia? Do you have any sort of psychosis? What is your actual diagnosis? Johns Hopkins is working on magic mushrooms or psilocybin with depression. MAPS was working on MDMA for PTSD, both of which were FDA breakthrough therapy designations.
Hmm.
So the very first thing is, what's your mindset? Is the patient properly screened? Because remember, I'm
Yeah.
talking about this as a medical procedure.
Hmm.
And then the setting. Where is this taking place and who is it taking place with? I happen to be with trusted doctors. I was diagnosed in the spring. I didn't have my first journey until September. We took
Okay.
a long runway to get super comfortable, answer all my questions, understand my intentions. And even still, I was scared going in because of all the
Hmm.
propaganda around psychedelics.
Yeah.
But all of the work going in with mindset, a proper diagnosis, a proper dosage. My guide is a medical doctor.
Right.
So, in terms of, I knew I had medical grade MDMA, meaning not something that was purchased off the street that could be
Right.
laced with anything. Like in Australia, they just had some issues with MDMA at a music festival because it was laced with some other stuff. I
Hmm.
had pure MDMA. I had a medical doctor, my therapist, and months of preparation. And when you look at it that way, the use of substances for mental health becomes a medical procedure.
Hmm.
When people use the word journey, they usually talk about it in terms of a therapeutic sense or wanting to understand the mind. Usually, when you use the word trip, that's more recreational. And I
Right.
have zero issue with either one. The only issue I have is when people are like, they might not pay attention. Magic mushrooms are a great example. A huge heroic dose is way
Yeah,
different than a little mini dose, which,
definitely.
I had in my third journey. So there was a lot. You had a really fantastic setup for that question. And I just wanted to kind of focus on where I come from.
Hmm.
The MDMA was a medical procedure for me.
Yeah.
I hope that kind of sets the stage a little bit.
Yeah, that's very important. Because when people get substances from off the street and from people they know, not only is the question of what's actually in it,
Yeah.
dose is actually a very important aspect because without the education and the medical assistance,
Yep.
you don't really know how your body's going to react to a certain dose. I mean, there's Reddit pages all over about how much you should take of something and how much you shouldn't take of something, but
There are.
it's such a case by case thing. 3 grams of something to you may impact someone else on a grander scale. And
Depending on our weight, depending
yeah,
on health. Absolutely.
definitely.
At least there's
Definitely.
guidelines, though. Like,
Yeah.
I fully believe that people can ignore the amount of painkiller they take on the bottle. Like the bottle
Hmm.
says take X amount. People can ignore that. But I think it goes a long way to actually, if people knew how much MDMA to take, I think it would be a huge benefit in terms of like as people, because you and I both know people are doing this stuff on their own
Yeah. Yeah. And as much as they want.
without understanding proper dosage. Because,
Hmm.
you're going out having fun. You're not doing an internet search real quick to find out how much, and you have really no idea what you're being given if you're purchasing it in ways that maybe aren't safe. That was not
Yes.
my situation. My situation was very
Hmm.
much a controlled medical situation.
Yes. That's why I think the assisted therapy aspect of it is so important because it's not just the substance. It's not the substance is going to heal you. It's not going to save you. It's not going to, you
No.
know, conduct any magic tricks. It's using that substance as more as a tool to leverage to, you know, open yourself up to then have the assisted therapy aspect.
Yeah.
And the therapeutic benefits of it can only be really utilized if you're in the right set and setting. And I think that's why
Yeah.
the assisted therapy is so important. When you got into your first round,
Hmm.
what was your initial reactions like afterwards? Like, were you like, okay, am I on the right track? Or were you like, I'm not sure if this is even working?
Oh my gosh, fantastic question. So, and everybody always asks, well, what was it like? Because they're
Uh-huh.
expecting like neon colors and stuff. And MDMA is an empathogen. It calms the body down and increases the level of connection you feel with yourself and with others. And for the very first time during that first journey, I actually heard my inner voice. I had
Oh,
never
wow.
heard my inner voice before. That my body was, I lived for over 20 years in a state of fight or flight without even knowing it.
Hmm.
So that was one thing. I jumped out of my first journey after about 5 hours. So an MDMA journey can last anywhere from 5 to 8 hours. If you
Hmm.
kind of jump out of it quickly, it was a sign to the people with whom I was working that I had a lot of work to do. And the first
Hmm.
journey for someone with a lot of trauma is usually all about safety because
Yeah.
it was like in a lot of ways my subconscious was wide open. So we get done the journey. I'm very aware that I jumped out of it to get control quickly. And then I was embarrassed that, oh, I didn't do a good job because, like
Right.
type A Jill. An hour after the journey, and I was crying. I was kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, it didn't work. My boyfriend at the time, he picked me up. I was kind of upset. I was like, I don't know what I was expecting, but I know I didn't feel any differently.
Hmm.
But in the car on the way back, I was beating myself up that I was such an inconvenience. This was like all of a half an hour away from where I live. This was not a big
Right.
deal. But I'm going through this. I'm such an inconvenience. I can't believe I had to ask somebody to help me with this. It didn't work. Da 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 da. And all of a sudden, kind of like, when you're walking or when you're in the shower or you're doing something, maybe you're driving and all of a sudden you have an idea that comes to like the front of your head or like your
Hmm.
mind. You're like, oh, why am I thinking about that? I had 2 to 3 different childhood memories where as a child, I felt like a burden or an inconvenience.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at these memories and I'm realizing I wasn't a burden as a child. My parents just didn't have the financial resources or the emotional resources to handle me. And my mind had just kind of randomly brought these 3 different memories to the front. And it was like I could see them. It's like they were on, I'm sorry, I'm out of frame. It's like I could
You're
see
good.
them, like they were on TV,
Hmm.
almost like they were somebody else's memories. And as adult Jill, I was able to say, hey, wait a minute. I wasn't an inconvenience. I was just simply a kid.
Right.
These other people could not, for whatever reason. And boom, it was like, okay, I'm not really inconvenient. This man loves me. He'll drive me anywhere. Relax. And at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, this is completely different than anything I would have expected. Nobody could have explained this to me.
Right.
And wow, that's how the next day, week, month, I didn't have my next journey until December. That's how
Mm.
it all unfolded, exactly like that first hour after the journey was over.
Wow. So going to your second session, were you a little bit more eager to get into it? Yeah, I
Yes.
can
I
imagine.
was so excited because
Hmm.
I had healed some stuff, and I always kind of do this. I make this graphic because I was integrating and healing some memories, and then I was still butting up against the fear.
Yeah.
The fear was I wasn't I definitely still had PTSD symptoms at that point. I was still suicidal. So you're integrating, then you kind of hit a little bit of the wall.
Hmm.
Don't do like I did. I tried to hack it. I tried to stay more
Yeah.
awake during the second journey. Nothing made sense. Nothing made
Yeah.
sense. I got out of the second journey. I was really bummed. Again, I don't know what I expected. And I got into the car. And as the car was warming up, um, as a kid, I had had a bicycle tire that had a hole in it, like it kept going flat. And I remember the tire being put in water so that we could find the air bubbles to see where the hole was to patch the hole.
Yeah.
And that's the image that came to my mind as I was sitting in the parking lot. The image was, relax, Jill. You didn't mess up the MDMA session. The MDMA
Yeah.
found the memories that need to be healed. You're fine. Relax. Go home. Get some soup. Get some sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was too excited. Don't try to
Hmm.
hack it. Just go along with it.
Yeah. That's a that's a great point actually. The the it's like you're going through this thing where you're trying to, put a finger on something
Yeah. Yeah.
so abstract, and us as humans, we love to be in control,
Yeah.
and it's like when it's so much we can't control, and we just have to leave it up to our bodies to regulate and our mind to fix. And
Yep.
just
Yep.
thinking about how, a lot of people, I can see a lot of people doing this type of therapy and just trying to find something to grip on and control.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can control. You kind of have to just
You don't
surrender.
need to. You
Yeah.
don't need to. That's the thing.
Hmm.
You don't need to.
Yeah, it's a process of just letting go,
Mhm.
and it's so hard to do for people that have gone through traumatic situations, because anyone who's been through something traumatic just wants to have a sense of control. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you talk about
I love your microphone. Your
oh,
microphone is
thank you.
cool. That
Thank
is really
you.
cool stuff.
Yeah, I like it. I like how it glows up and stuff. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. 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 Someday I'll be cool. Not anytime soon. That's cool stuff.
I think what you're doing is cool. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, but it's not a light up microphone, so hey.
Can you speak on the the MDMA's sort of unique ability to
Uh-huh.
being an empathogen, making you vulnerable and just kind of opening up your subconscious? Like, what does it feel like to be this closed individual who's kind of putting everything internally and holding it in, and then just having that flower just open?
Yeah, so I think a really good example would be for your audience to think of a time when they're super, super nervous.
Mhm,
Maybe it's a public speaking. That's the word because I love public speaking. The more people, the better. So, but I know a
mhm,
lot of people hate that. Um, for me, it would be like skiing. I skied once in my life. I was terrible. Like if I had to suddenly go down a mountain, I'd be terrified. So something that would kind of make your system kind of upset, sweaty palms, da da da. And then I
mhm.
want you to think about the complete opposite of that feeling. You're hanging out at
Right.
home, you're watching a movie, you're eating your favorite snack, you might be in your clothes for the second day, you're kind of
Yeah.
having like the bed rot kind of day, that feeling of relaxation.
Mhm.
That's the closest I can explain it
Right.
because it's not like you're inebriated. It's not like you feel like you're under a drug, at least the dosage that I was in. Instead, when I started to talk about things, like I was 1,000% sure at the time that if my father had been in the room, he would have had his hands around my neck.
Mm.
For me to have talked about that while I was not under, I would never have talked about that. It was just
Right.
too scary. I like that my
Yeah.
own father would really want to kill me because that's what he did to my mother at a parent conference meeting.
Mm.
But MDMA, it just kind of it took that like, oh my gosh, I have to get on stage, I'm so nervous, to like, I'm hanging out at home. It brought the I'm hanging out at home to my body. It calmed my body down so that I could start to talk about really scary and unpleasant things. I'm not good enough. Nothing I did was enough. The universe is against me, like some really scary things without my body reacting. And so
Mhm.
there's no there's no crazy fireworks. You do sometimes get cold and get warm. You do sometimes want to put your eye mask on and just kind of relax and let the medicine, I like to say the medicine kind of marinating in my brain. For
Yeah.
me, I'm super chatty. So for me, the, talking to my doctor and guide, putting on my head mask, running to the bathroom, coming back, like, uh, it's and by the way, you also don't know that it's been 5 hours. Like, that first journey
Yeah.
for 5 hours felt like 45 minutes. Uh,
Wow.
so I always encourage people when they're going in for therapy, go ahead and record it, especially if you're a chatty person like I am, because I learned a whole lot from the transcripts that I never
Mm.
remembered. Uh, so I hope did I do it justice? Did I answer the question
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I never thought about that aspect, recording it, because now that I'm thinking about it, like, it would be kind of hard to recall the things that you, um, were let out, because once you're done with it, it's kind of like your brain's doing that healing, and it's not really
Yeah.
you're on to the next thing. We're humans, we're on to, like, what I'm doing next. So, recording is a great way to,
It's
recall those
amazing.
things.
All 3 of mine were recorded. The second journey, we had some technical glitches technical glitches, so I didn't get
Yeah.
that transcript, but it is fascinating to listen, or I just transcribed them so I could read them fast. It's fascinating to literally see the trauma, like, on paper.
Mhm.
Like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's I literally believed that my parents could never love me." Like, it's
Mhm.
fascinating. So, I always encourage not video, just, like, audio,
Yeah.
you know, um because you're going to be fast forwarding through for the times that you're like with the eye mask.
Yeah, seeing the trauma on papers could be very impactful for
Yeah.
people. Like, actually reading it, because 'cause you're kinda separating yourself from it, and now you're reading it, and you're, like, internalizing it, like, you're thinking you're reading about somebody else, and you're like, "This is me I'm talking about," you know?
Oh my gosh, it's me. Yeah, it explains so much. Yeah, it's fascinating. And you'll have people that'll argue against that, especially if they're doing like a psilocybin journey, because that's like
Hmm.
natural and da da da. But from a trauma standpoint, and that's where I come from,
Hmm.
I'm a huge proponent of recording it and going back and looking at the transcripts later. They're like nuggets in there, nuggets of like, oh my gosh, I need to heal that.
Yeah. Um, in your next session,
Hmm.
did you go to psilocybin on the next one?
The third one.
Okay, can you explain the differences between that and the MDMA sessions?
Yeah, yeah. So my my second journey was December. In March of the following year, I had a nightmare.
Oh
And
wow.
very long story short, that nightmare actually prolonged the time it took us to get to my third journey in May, because I had this horrible nightmare of myself as a little toddler with like a monster face. I was a child of the 80s, so it was like a Pac-Man face.
Yeah. I can imagine, yeah.
Pac-Man face with like a lot of teeth. And very long story short, I could not get that little toddler out of her childhood home. There was like literally no
Mhm.
door. And I'm an English major. I love visualization. Visualization is really underrated with mental health. And through talk therapy, my therapist and I, we were trying to get her out. It was just the weirdest kind of like daydream of like, why can't I just take the hand of this little 5-year-old Jill and like walk her out? I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And my doctors had kind of said, look, this is months of talk therapy and you're not able to even visualize a door to that house. There's obviously something here. Be aware that it might be a good strategy to use a little bit of psilocybin in your third journey if we need it. And I was like, okay, whatever. I had never
Yeah.
done any sort of thing before, but I was like, I want to get her. I know this is important to get her out of the house.
Mhm.
Third journey, start with MDMA, normal process. And I would say maybe an hour, hour and a half. No, I apologize. Hour and a half to 2 hours in, where I was fully ensconced in the MDMA medicine.
Mhm.
My doctors said, okay, let's go ahead and try to get Jill out of that house. And I said, which one? Downstairs or upstairs, Jill?
Mm.
And my doctors, they didn't break a stride. They were like, whoever wants to come out, da da da.
Mhm.
Long story, and the transcript, I actually have the transcript in the book. I could not, even under MDMA and two trusted doctors, I could get her out of the room. The upstairs Jill was in my childhood room. I couldn't get her out of the house. And at that
Mm.
point, my guide said, I think we need to disrupt your system. He didn't actually say those words, but like basically,
Right.
I think it's time for the mushrooms. I had a very small, now I know, I had a very small dose of mushrooms. It doesn't take much.
Mhm.
And with the combination of MDMA and the mushrooms in my system, I had this amazing, you did have a couple of the visuals, like the transcript actually had me saying like, oh, it's really colorful. Oh, this is really cool.
Yeah.
You know, like when you go, the blooming onion, the meal, the blooming onion, the fried onion that's kind of like opened up.
Yeah, yeah.
Under magic mushrooms or psilocybin, my childhood home literally opened up,
Wow.
completely turned black like the universe, and boom, I suddenly found that little 5-year-old that had been trapped in her bedroom in a garden.
Wow.
I don't remember any of this. I didn't speak
Yeah.
it. I didn't remember it at the time. I had to tell my doctors as soon as I kind of got out of the mushroom part of the journey. I told my doctors, thank goodness I was recording.
Yeah.
I can still remember kind of the house unfolding and opening up. But then, like, my integration had more visualization of just escaping that house and that kind of stuff. But a very different set of visual stimuli with magic mushrooms. But I don't think I ever would have gotten close to being able to even free that little girl if the MDMA hadn't calmed down my body's fear response.
Right.
I just said a whole lot. What
No, that makes
questions
perfect
have I
sense.
created?
I'm just thinking of like the different, like when I think of these substances, I kind of think of them as tools when they're used in the right way. And I'm just kind of visualizing like how the MDMA was kind of like, it opened the door but it's still up to you to walk out that door. But it's like I'm also viewing the psilocybin as just like dissolving the door. Like there is no door, there's no walls. It's now what are you gonna do now? Because there's no barriers.
Yeah.
I just think it's
And
fascinating.
do it with somebody sober. Like I don't
Hmm.
think I would have been able to do that on my own. Other people maybe. I wasn't experienced enough or capable. I guess I would have been capable if I had understood what mushrooms were at the time. But just the safety, making sure
Yeah,
you have somebody sober sitting with you when you're doing that.
definitely. It gives you that point of reference for sure to ground you.
Yeah.
What kind of I know you were talking about before how you kind of when you were on the MDMA, how it you kind of just laid there and let it marinate in your brain.
Sometimes.
Um with the psilocybin, what kind of responses were you having? Like was it more of a the relaxed setting like the MDMA, or was it more of like a conscious thing where you were like aware and
No.
awake?
So, are we talking psilocybin in general? Because I have had subsequent journeys just with psilocybin, or are we focusing on that third journey between MDMA with
Um,
those substances? Where do you want me to go?
in that third one that was
Okay.
with the two doctors, like was it more of like a your eyes were closed and you were in a whole nother world, or was it like you were like awake and conscious, like trying to, you know?
No, great question. The MDMA, a lot more awake and conscious. When it came to the mushrooms, number one, the preparation. Number two,
Hmm.
me really wanting to get that little girl out of the house.
Yeah.
And number three, whatever the appropriate dose. And number four, being supported. No, I definitely the time with the psilocybin in my system was absolutely a mask, my eye mask, cuddled under. I'm a blanket person. I
Yeah.
actually used to bring my own blanket with me,
Cool.
cuddled up, and I think I was probably in that part of the journey for about an hour ish
Mm.
for it to kind of fully unfold, and then even come out of it. So
Do you
not long,
know
or not
do you
long
know
at all.
the dose you were given in that third trial of psilocybin?
I don't, and I'm very careful to not give dosages
Hmm.
because there's too many people who are like, "Well, Jill did this."
Yeah,
And
right.
so super all I know is from what I have since learned about psilocybin because I've had subsequent psilocybin only journeys, I know
Hmm.
for a fact it was a very small dose. I didn't need
Hmm.
much.
Right.
I just needed enough to kind of the MDMA was not enough to actually make movement for that little girl. We needed to kind of
Hmm.
free her. So it was
Yeah.
very small. It was a very small dose.
So following that third trial and you're going through the evaluation again to see
Mhm.
um the progress you've made,
Yeah.
what was your reaction and like what did you find after that third section after you had that evaluation?
Yeah. So I wasn't so the evaluation should not happen right after a journey
Hmm.
because it's really the integration time. It's the time after a journey that's super helpful. Think of integration like physical therapy.
Mm,
Like if you've
okay.
had a medical procedure and you don't do your physical therapy, what's the
Hmm.
point of having the medical procedure?
Right.
So uh, I would say I had a lot of visualization in the very beginning about reparenting myself. Like that little 5-year-old girl, she had been trapped in my subconscious. She had to learn what life was. So I had a lot of fun with visualizations of like this little 5-year-old Jill kind of following me around and understanding what life is.
Hmm.
The journey was like in May. And then I would say by September, kind of checking in with my doctors, I no longer felt fear of the universe. I saw that there was a future. There was something in the book where earlier in the book, I think maybe even before the second journey, somebody had there was some podcast and it was like, well, what color do you see your future? And I didn't see a future color. I just saw black,
Right.
not even stars, just like black.
Mm,
By September, after that journey in May, it was like a hazy pastel. Like I
mm,
could actually see a future. And those were kind of the requirements we had. And then I think I had a journey like 8 months after that to kind of while I no longer kind of qualified for a PTSD diagnosis, I still had a good number of capital T traumas to work through.
Yeah.
And those journeys wound up becoming psilocybin based because
Mhm.
I wasn't coming into those journeys with my body freaking out. I was coming into
Yeah.
those journeys saying, I kind of want to understand why I've got this pattern of XYZ.
Right.
And so subsequent journeys have been psilocybin.
Can you talk about those subsequent journeys and
Yeah.
the kind of work that you did internally in those journeys?
So I've done psilocybin journeys. I've done a little bit of DMT, like psychedelic tourism kind of thing,
Mhm.
and I've also had my own MDMA journey with a sober friend helping me out. And the way that I define it, I know when I've got a pretty severe trauma point where my body is flipping out.
Yeah.
That's when I need MDMA.
Mhm.
And I will be really upfront with you and say sometimes you just don't even know there's a trauma point around something. Like I
Yeah.
just in October I found out I had a trauma point. I called up a friend of mine to sit with me because I'm like, I know I need to heal this and my body is really dysregulated. But psilocybin journeys for me are much more of a like a spring cleaning, want to clean
Yeah.
out the cobwebs. Something's kind of bothering me or I'm seeing a pattern, I can't figure it out. Maybe every 6-ish months, kind of a medium dose little journey. Because again, I've been guided so much, I kind of know how to
Right.
work my way through it. I don't do any sort of crazy heroic dose. It's almost like for me, psilocybin is like if you have a phenomenal sleepover 8-hour conversation with your best friend and your best
Yeah.
friend's honest with you and telling you something that you didn't might not have wanted to know, but is really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
That's how psilocybin journeys are for me. And of course, you've got the visuals and stuff, but they're usually clear out the cobwebs. I'm trying to understand why I'm doing something. Whereas the MDMA, my body's all dysregulated. I can't calm down. There's a trauma
Yeah.
point. MDMA. Those are the differences and the reasons why different substances for me.
Yeah, that's huge. Just having that point of reference from those sessions
Yeah.
to know kind of like how to guide yourself through that. Um, that's why I think it's so important that this becomes implemented nationwide because people
We're
need
close.
that.
We're
Yeah,
getting
we're
close.
close. We are close, and
Yeah.
I hope it gets there because having that point of reference of okay, I know what questions to not only ask myself, but to know things are when you need that spring cleaning to be aware of that
Yeah.
is super important because like you said, there's certain trauma points around things that we're unaware of.
Mhm.
And just having that awareness of, oh, maybe I need to look in and do some work because this is something that I'm having trouble putting a finger on. I think that's
Exactly.
huge.
It's a great way of saying I'm acting a certain way. I'm thinking a certain way. I don't know why. I can't work my
Yeah.
way out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah.
Um, I just thinking of well, I've had I've had a couple journeys
Uh-huh.
with psychedelics,
Yep.
none assisted. I do really want to have an assisted therapy session because I think that would be the most
Mm.
helpful in moving. Um, just
Yeah.
having that, medical professional there to, put you in the right direction and let you know that, okay, this this is what we need to focus on because from my experience with psychedelics, it's like everything becomes so fascinating. Everything around you is interesting. Could be something you just, dive into for hours at a time.
Uh,
But having that compass of like, okay, look at this, focus on this, let's dive into this specific aspect of your trauma instead of just having the world just dissolve around you and you just being lost to it. 'Cause that's why I think a lot of people have bad experiences with psychedelics because they're doing it on their own. They got it from a friend and now they're just in their living room in the dark and they don't really know what to look at because everything is fascinating. Everything is something you could, dissect.
yep.
And
Yep.
then these feelings or traumas will arise and then they try to get that sense of control. They can try to get that grip, like, okay, oh, I didn't want to focus on this. How do I get myself out of it? And that's not really how it works. You can't, there's no eject button.
Not
Like
what
once
you're
you're
there
in it,
for.
yeah, once you're in it, you're in it.
Yep.
And you have to surrender to it.
Yeah.
And
It's actually,
yeah,
I wrote the workbook, I wrote the
mm,
memoir, and then last January I went psychedelic tourism. I went to a retreat where it's
nice.
psilocybin and tried DMT, which was delightful. But again, I went in with the right set and setting.
Yeah.
There were people on that retreat came out very disappointed. And I
Mm,
became very aware that people don't know how to set intentions or even that they sometimes have to set intentions.
right.
And so that's why I wrote the workbook. It's the cheat code. It's like the 8 ways that me and my therapist created my intentions
Hmm.
because I was like, you're right. You get to a point with psychedelics mentally where there's a point of no return. You cannot get control back.
Hmm.
And why waste that opportunity when it just, a couple of weeks of kind of thinking about your intentions and really doing some meditation, some internal work, and the results you can have from a therapeutic journey or a journey, when you're at a retreat, you're being supervised with sober people there anyway.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of work done. But I was really surprised how people were not prepared for it. So that's why I wrote the workbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Uh, Coming out with that memoir and your website, I think it could really guide people and give them a frame of reference and just kind of that reassurance that, okay, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it for a reason. I can't just, go into it thinking it's going to be end all be all.
Mm-mm.
And as you said before, it takes multiple sessions. It's not just, I like the analogy you made to physical therapy. Like, if you tear a muscle, you have to get surgery on it. You're not going to go play basketball the next day.
Right.
You got to go through that physical therapy. You have to treat it, you have to build it back up. And that's so important because that's something that a mistake that I made early on in
Mm.
my exploration with psychedelics. I would use it and I thought afterwards, I'm like, okay, I'm healed now. Like, this is the new
Oh,
me now. And then you get integrated back into life and then it just hits you like a freight train. Like, oh,
yeah.
I'm not changed at all. Like, I have some new insights, but I am not there yet. And I have to
Sure.
now, and then a lot of people confuse that with, oh, maybe I need to take more because that one didn't do it that time. And I
Right.
think that's what starts the cycle of, okay, maybe I need to try a higher dose because when I try to get reintegrated, it kind of just faded away overnight. And I don't have the same mentality that I had when I was under the influence of the substance. So then
Mhm.
they take more,
Yeah.
and then, those traumas still exist within you. And then they could arise even more viscerally because you took this higher dose, you know, and
Like,
then, and then you're just stuck in that loop.
oh my gosh. People don't, I'm a little concerned so the FDA has all the clinical data. The assumption is I'm not in the know, I'm not special. Everything I hear is that it should be approved by the FDA in
Mhm.
August in the US, and then the DEA has like 3 months to reschedule MDMA. I know that's a lot of acronyms, I'm sorry. Uh,
Yeah.
so by 2025, I'm hoping that this will start to be available. And
Yeah.
as soon as something is available, in my opinion, the way capitalism works, we're going to see lots of marketing claims. And
Yeah.
part of what I wanted to really explain to people is you have to put in it's 40, 20, 40. It's 40% of the time is thinking about your intentions, figuring out what you want to work on. 20% is the actual day of the journey. And then the other 40% is the integration. And
Yeah.
even people who are super close to me and they're like, that MDMA session, that was amazing. And 2 weeks later, like, I'm ready for more. I'm like, no, you haven't even started your integration. Like,
Yeah.
just relax. You have to give it like a month or two, in my opinion,
Mhm.
until you can even begin to start thinking about your next one. I mean, unless you're like in a super, super crisis and that's what a doctor says.
Yeah.
My experience, most people want to chase that kind of initial the firecracker of all
Yeah.
the insight. But you have to kind of live life and experience triggers and experience the things that would have upset you before for you to kind of have an opportunity to like, oh, wait, this is, oh, look at that situation. This is why I'm responding that way. Let me shift.
Hmm.
And that requires life to be lived.
Yeah, that's the important part. The the integration and knowing that you want to get to a point where you don't have to use these substances anymore. You want to get to a point where
Yep.
you're
For medical.
healed and
Yep.
aware. Yeah. And
Yep.
like you said, when these things do become regulated and legalized, there is probably going to be a lot of campaigns and
Yep.
marketing to push these things on people.
Yep.
But I also think the most important part of that is following that up with education,
Yep.
which is going to be the responsibility of the user. It's going to be the responsibility of people to go and listen to podcasts and to read books and to understand that, okay, just because something is legalized does not mean it's just like free game. Like you have to go into it with the
As a
intention,
medical procedure.
yeah, and also
Yep.
have some sort of, I, I want to call it like, have some sort of like goal where it could be like an exit plan.
Yep.
Like m- make some point where you like, I want to accomplish this,
Hmm.
because I think you can start a vicious cycle if you just go into it and don't really have those goals or plans or checkpoints. And then it can just become a cycle of, well, I feel really good when I do this. So then now you're kind of becoming reliant on the substance to feel that way. And I think
Mm.
that's what kind of starts the cycle of addiction. But psychedelics are a little different in that
Yeah,
aspect.
psychedelics are a little different. Yeah. It's hard to get
Psychedelics,
super
yeah,
addicted to psychedelics. Yeah.
psychedelics are kind of like they have a mind of their own. Like
Yeah.
I believe they will tell you when it's time to stop.
Well, mushrooms in particular, the more frequently you use them, the less potent they are.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's no advantage to, I'm not talking about microdosing. I'm talking about
Hmm.
like a macro dose or a
Yeah.
larger dose. And MDMA has a hangover. Like
Yeah.
if you don't supplement and really take care of yourself, nobody walks out of an MDMA journey on a Saturday and on Sunday says, "Oh, I want to take more." If
Hmm.
it's really MDMA.
Yeah.
I'm not saying if it's laced with anything else. Like it's just not that kind of substance. You feel yucky
Yeah.
afterward. You need I wasn't kidding when I was like soup, tea, sleeping, like that's my day after an MDMA journey.
Yeah, definitely. That they have a way of like, I don't know what it is, but psychedelics are just their own thing. They're really more tools than drugs.
Yeah.
They only work when it's time for them to work. And if it, if there's no work to be done, it's kind of like fruitless endeavor, because they're there to really have that internal dialogue with yourself.
Yeah.
And if you reach the point where it's already giving you that dialogue, it kind of knows like what are you doing back here? Like why are you still taking this? Like we've done this already. We've gone over this.
Ready to move on to the next.
Yeah, it's time to
We're
integrate.
we all have onion that we're all my therapist likes to her favorite line is we're all children wrapped in layers. So there's
Hmm.
always something to understand about.
Yeah,
In some ways it's become a little bit, how like bodybuilders love to like work on their bodies. Like I'm
yeah,
fascinated to work on my mind now. There's always something to discover your patterns in life, why you think certain ways, what stories we kind of tell ourselves. So even though I've done the majority of my trauma healing, I'm going to a retreat in 2 weeks and I'm thrilled to because I'm going to be able to understand my mind even more.
yeah. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think physical health is just as important as mental health,
Hmm.
and they're not as separate as people think they are. They're
Nope.
very where they work in tandem, and it's so important to understand like, okay, my mind, if I view it more as a muscle in and of itself, and you can
Yep.
appreciate it more. It needs water, it needs sleep, it needs rest. It needs time to you know
Rethink
to
it,
warm up.
re-energize. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super important.
Yep.
When you initially found out that you didn't qualify to be diagnosed with PTSD anymore,
Uh-huh.
was it like, was there any kind of like victory lap feeling, like, oh wow, I didn't think this would ever happen, or was it more like, okay, I just understand myself a little more?
It was because my symptoms all stemmed from fear.
Hmm.
There was no victory lap. There was no like shiny. I actually wrote that in the book. Like there were no medal ceremonies. I
Hmm.
didn't get a cap and gown. All I got was a sense of I'm allowed to be in this world
Mm.
and I do this. Like there was just this feeling of, and it's actually something I've continued to work on, the idea that I was allowed to exist in the world, that there was
Yeah.
nothing going to come crashing down. Life might bring me challenges, but it wasn't like I was a target. In my
Right.
entire life, I had kind of thought I was a target.
Yeah.
So yeah, there wasn't, and I'll be honest with you, I don't even know that I realized how far I had come until like talking with my therapist in September and realizing, oh wow, wait, I do see a color of my future. I'm not
Hmm.
suicidal anymore. It was very gradual, very, very gradual. As most integrations are. Like you have insights, but like the healing in the brain and the rewriting of, and this is all
Yeah.
fancy stuff that I don't know of, like rewriting the neurons or rewriting the
Yeah.
pathways, however all that works, it takes
Hmm.
time. So great question, but no,
Yeah.
it's very gradual.
Yeah. That what you were speaking on, that just the rewriting of everything. People think that like, oh, when you like our brain stops growing at 25, and then like we're just stuck in our ways from then on out. But our brains are so plastic and malleable for life, and it's never too late to do that work. You're never too old. You're never too experienced to just have a reprogramming, and
Absolutely.
yeah, to look back and say, oh wow, I didn't even know these things were trauma points for
Thing.
me.
I
Yeah.
did I didn't know why did I always do XYZ?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have to do XYZ like that anymore. Oh.
Yeah. In my personal experience, I haven't tried MDMA. I've used psilocybin and LSD,
Uh-huh.
and they have the similarities, but they are quite different. Um, I think LSD is more of like a it's more like all focused on the mind, and I think psilocybin is focused more on mind and body. It kind of
Oh,
helps you
interesting.
dive into both.
Uh-huh.
But I had an insight on my first use of LSD because I had the same thing you had in terms of like that shoulder shrug and that just that pent up anxiety and that just like that feeling like, oh, I have to like justify my existence, my just being here. I have to have that justification.
Mhm,
And then when
mhm.
I took LSD for the first time, I don't recommend anybody just taking LSD from a friend and just doing it, but that's what I decided to do. But I was lucky enough to have um a great get a great insight from it.
Uh-huh.
I had learned that I had this feeling of, well, I thought I was depressed, and I thought that I was like, because I always had this innate feeling of like guilt. I had this like revolving feeling of guilt my whole life, and I never really knew why. It was just kind of like, why do I always feel guilty?
Mhm.
Even though like I might have not done anything, I just always felt this underlying feeling of guilt. And I was like, is this some kind of like ancestral thing that I'm just carrying with me? I didn't
Right.
really know what it was. But then when I took LSD, I came out of it realizing that I I had a problem with like I always wanted my mom not to work. Like that was like something that was like really like I don't know where it stemmed from. I think it stemmed from my childhood and just my mom always working. So
Yeah.
then I was like, I had this wish, like, oh, I don't want my mom to work. But then I would carry that with me and internalize it and say, like, oh, it's my fault that
She
my mom
has
has to
to.
work this hard because she has to take care of me, and she wouldn't have to work this hard if if I wasn't here, then she wouldn't have to be working this hard. So
Mm,
then when I got that insight, I was like, okay, like
that's
it's
not really
not
true.
that's not true. I'm personalizing it, and
As a
I need
toddler would do, as you're
yeah.
supposed to do as a child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you take it personally, and I realized, like, like, my shoulders dropped, and I was like, "Okay, like,
Oh,
I need to focus on just being the greatest individual I can and not try to, like, go back in time and, like, solve something that I physically cannot do." And I
and
had to
nor could you
yeah,
even at that point. Oh,
yeah,
that's beautiful. No, that's so beautiful.
yeah, I just that that I would have never came to that conclusion had I have not taken that substance and opened myself up to those vulnerabilities. But I also think it's everyone's not gonna have that experience. Like, I think I'm pretty like, I did set intentions going into it. I
Uh-huh.
was pretty I wasn't the most educated, but I did have a sense of, like, I can't just take this and just sit back. Like, I knew I had to have a goal and
Uh-huh.
something I wanted to find. I didn't even know what I was going to find, but I knew whatever I was
Very
just more
rarely do.
open.
Yeah.
I was just open to, like, whatever problem presents itself, I'm not gonna back away from it.
Oh,
And that's more like that's a good approach to go into these substances because you don't really know what you're gonna find when you go into it.
that's the whole point.
Yeah, but you can't duck away or shy away from it once it presents itself. You have to be like, okay, this is what it's telling me
Yeah.
is the issue. Now let's work through it, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel.
Yeah. What a lovely story.
Yeah, it actually got me interested into just the whole psychedelic world, and then I later got into like um not only just psychedelics, but just the whole holistic way of healing
Yeah.
because I think, like you said before, like the systems we've had in this country and surrounding mental health have not been very
Great.
serving. You know,
Been great.
a lot of people have been left to figure things out on their own. I think having that education, having just that option of, okay, I could go through MDMA assisted therapy, or I could go on a mushroom retreat, or I
Hmm.
like having those options, I think will give people just more of a sense of security. Like, okay, I know there are ways I can go about fixing this. I don't feel hopeless. I don't have that, that layer of just like blackness. Like there's nowhere to turn.
Yeah.
And I think having those options is super, super, super important.
And for folks who are in that level of, I'm hesitant to use the word crisis. I'm going to say folks who are at that level of understanding what they need when they are vetting until it's completely available in this country. When they're vetting either a guide to sit with or a retreat, there should always be several calls beforehand. There
Yeah.
should be some sort of medical intake. There should be some sort of medical person. A lot of times you're not really getting that in the States if you're just kind of like hanging out with someone who's being sober and whatever. But definitely on a retreat situation, you should be aware of, they should be asking you medical questions, your
Yeah.
background, your diagnosis. Um, MDMA is a stimulant. I was fine in terms of my heart. So if anyone who's kind of vetting and looking at places, if you aren't being vetted as the patient for, or as the person going to the retreat for what you want to achieve, possible diagnosis and any health issues, that's a red flag, and I would continue looking for other retreats. The retreat
Yeah.
I'm going on, there's been like 4 meetings already. I had to send my EKG.
Yeah. That's
Like,
responsible. Yeah.
yeah, that you really want to vet where you're going. In my opinion,
Yeah.
you really want to vet where you're going.
How was your DMT experience? How different was that?
Oh my gosh. So now we're talking way past PTSD
Yeah.
thing, psychedelic tourism. I did go into it was last January, so it was like a year-ish. I had some intentions. I really wasn't even paying attention to the fact that DMT was going to be one of the offerings to me. I was just
Mhm.
like, I just wanted to get out of very cold Pennsylvania in January.
Yep. Yeah, yeah.
And I haven't written, I plan at some point to write about the experience. For me, the DMT was, and it was regular DMT, like it wasn't 5-MeO. And that's what I'm working on this next
Mhm.
retreat. It was delightful. For me, it was every stereotype. I got to chat with some of my relatives who had passed over to the other side who
Wow.
wanted to chat with me. Had a
Wow.
lovely set of conversations. Probably went in like 4 or 5 different times because DMT journeys are very short.
Yeah.
I still remember like the second to last one. I was like, okay. I was talking to my aunt. I'm like, is there anything else you want to tell me? She's like, yes, you need to come back one more time. Like, I had
Wow.
an absolute blast. Um,
That's great.
but again, set and setting. And I do my personal thought, so I could be wrong. I'm not sure we're ever going to know. Like, I'm not an organized religion person. So there
Mhm.
are a lot of people who talk about DMT and they talk about seeing religious figures or, that kind of stuff. I don't believe I'm very spiritual. So it kind of
Mhm.
makes sense to me that I would see my ancestors, on
Yeah.
my father's side, there were a whole bunch of aunts. It makes
Yeah.
sense I would see my aunts versus me seeing a religious figure,
Right.
but I can totally see how other people with different belief system would see something different, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such an actually positive experience. I've heard a lot of people that have crippling stories with DMT.
Again, set and setting and experience.
Yeah.
I had already been very experienced with psychedelics. Like, I would never say to someone who had never had any experience with an enhancing substance to go do DMT for the first.
Right.
With
Yeah.
LSD, depending on your dosage and where
Mhm.
you are with LSD, like that wouldn't be my first line of entry either.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Definitely take it step by step.
Yeah, try some golden teacher little psilocybin small journeys before you start jumping into DMT or LSD.
Yeah.
With sober
Yeah.
people and with doing some work before.
Yeah. Definitely. DMT is such a fascinating substance to me. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't know that DMT is actually produced androgynously in the brain.
Yep.
Um,
It's already
and
there.
it's so you're kind of it's just fascinating through the research that's going on, how much more information we're finding about these substances,
Yep.
and back to just having these things decriminalized and legalized. It's going to lead to so much more context and understanding when it comes to these different substances and how they can help you, and
Yeah.
also in the right place, right time, how it can actually, undo certain traumas and
Years.
things in your brain that you have to reorganize.
Yeah.
So I think what MAPS is doing is great in their work, and what you're doing in your testimonial experiences, I think, is very important. I think we're at the point where it's like we're at the dawn of a new era of
Yeah.
healing, and people like such as yourself that have these stories are going to be very vital in helping the narrative of going through assisted therapy and kind of dissolving these stigmas around these substances.
Yeah.
Um, because we need to hear from medical professionals, but we also need to hear from people that have actually done these substances and have testimonies of how it's changed them and the
Yeah.
work that they had to do and the certain things they had to prepare for.
Yep.
I think it's
Yeah.
going to be huge.
I tried Bufo 5-MeO DMT in
Mm,
December because that's the retreat I'm going on,
hmm.
and how that experience of trauma, like MDMA puts the memory right here and you can look at it.
Hmm.
5-MeO DMT puts you literally in the memory. I
Yeah.
remember my dad was yelling at me. I'm in the memory with 53-year-old Jill looking,
Wow.
saying, boy, no wonder I did XYZ. This is how he was treating me. I'm actually going to do a presentation in May at PsyCon because
Oh, nice.
the implement the implications in terms of trauma healing, like I'm not sure if Bufo would have been the best thing when I was in the midst of the PTSD
Mhm.
because I think I really needed to calm my body down.
Yeah.
But in terms of healing big trauma, I'm fascinated by what Bufo can do and the speed of it. So that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons I'm going on this retreat so I can be able to verbally explain the difference in trauma healing between MDMA and Bufo.
That's gonna be fascinating. I hope I catch that. I wanna tune in to that,
We'll see if
speech you're
they put
gonna
it
give.
online. I'm not sure, but I
Yeah,
guarantee I'll probably wind up doing some YouTube videos on it. I guarantee.
definitely. Please do, because I wanna learn more, and I'm just fascinated in all these different substances and how they all work differently, but they all can be used for healing.
Yeah,
And the new generation of, young people that are coming up now have a whole new arsenal of things to help them.
yeah,
They're not just left to, you know, the whims of their traumas. They're not just left to figure it out all on their own.
yeah,
And I think it's going to be a great future when it comes to this stuff if we go about it responsibly and follow it up with education.
yeah. If research is allowed to continue, like right now, there's dozens and dozens of clinical trials. The Veterans Association has just agreed to start doing some clinical trials. I mean, we're at the we're all looking at the MAPS research and like all cheering and I'm going to say that's awesome and I'm so looking forward to additional research and
Yeah.
what we can learn. Yeah.
Yeah. It's taken 37 years for maps to get this far. I mean,
Yep. Yeah.
I'm
Most
glad they
patients.
never quit. I'm glad they never quit because it takes time, but I think we're at the doorstep finally, and
Yeah.
I'm hopeful, looking forward.
So am I.
Where can people find you, your story, and
Oh,
keep up with every endeavor you're going into going
yeah.
forward?
So thank you for asking. I'm the journeysage.com. So online, my website can find everything. I'm also the Journey Sage on YouTube. I was a teacher way back in the day.
Mhm.
So I look at my long form videos on YouTube as kind of like the curriculum that I wish had been around when I was going through the therapy.
Nice.
So I deep dive into like my intentions and what a journey is like and how important integration is and that kind of stuff. So I would usually send people there. If they're super interested in my story, I tell the story very little 2020 hindsight. I tell the story as I was going through it. And very
Mhm.
often I'll hear people like, I was talking back to the book. It wasn't your fault, Jill. And I'm like, well, but trauma does. So that stuff's on Amazon. But I'm sending
Nice.
most people to the YouTube channel because a lot of the questions I get are there. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's usually the best way for people to start getting introduction, in my opinion, the YouTube channel.
Cool. Everybody go follow Jill, the Journey Sage.
Journey
Make
Sage.
sure you educate yourself and stay aware of all the new research that's coming out because it's an everyday thing.
Yeah.
Every single day, there's new research and new studies and new peer-reviewed papers coming out on these substances. I think just keeping up with the latest information regarding all these substances and their uses will keep you not only better informed, but it will keep everyone kind of in this universal loop of like where we're at
Yeah.
in terms of how close we are to having these things legalized and decriminalized. And yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't I would say that psychedelics are a great thing and they can help so many people, but I also would like to say that they may not be for everybody.
Absolutely. Yes. Get screened.
Yeah.
Make sure your diagnosis is appropriate. Make sure there's appropriate set and setting. Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah, so having that medical analysis and evaluation is very important. And I'd like to thank you for being a guest on my podcast. You've been very informative and very comprehensive. Thank you for telling your story and opening up. And I appreciate your time.
Oh my gosh, this was a delight. You had some phenomenal questions. So,
Thank you.
and it's also nice to be chatting with someone who has actually used some of the medicines to have a frame of reference. So, I appreciate your
Mhm.
time too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure having you on. I hope you have a good new year, and I look forward to everything you're doing.
Awesome. Take care. We'll chat soon.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living.
Bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Totally unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new era.
No, don't clap, man. Make it more
And Hillary are demons. Feeling peace in our time.
Most people still want to run for vote.
Peace in all time.